WSIX TV, Nashville, Tennessee.
Regularly scheduled programming will not be seen tonight so that we may bring you ABC News coverage of the Republican National Convention. From Miami Beach, ABC News presents Convention 72, coverage of the fourth session of the Republican National Convention. Brought to you by the Ford Motor Company. They listen better and they'd like to hear from you. And by Goodyear, makers of tough, long-wearing polysteel tires. Polyester for smoothness, steel for protection. Polysteel only from Goodyear. From Convention Hall, ABC News correspondents Harry Reasoner and Howard K. Smith.
Good evening. The Republican Party has opened the semi-climactic night of its convention with Richard Nixon 8 miles away in his home in Key Biscayne, and no doubt watching all this on television, the party will duly renominate him for president. Down on the floor, they're getting ready to call the roll of states to see which state wants to nominate somebody. As has been predetermined, New York State will say it wants to nominate somebody, and then Governor Rockefeller will stand and nominate Richard Nixon. And when he does, we'll go down to the floor to carry his address live. In this afternoon's session, the even harmony of the convention was ruffled slightly and briefly by a fight over rules.
That rules fight centered on an attempt by liberal Republicans from big city states to increase their voting strength in the 1976 Republican Convention. It was the only clash that developed on the floor of this tightly coordinated meeting, and we have reports on what has been going on, beginning with Frank Reynolds.
Well, Harry, the Republicans have got it all together now. There was never really any doubt about the outcome of that fight this afternoon concerning rules. It did lend a little excitement to the afternoon session, if not very much in the way of suspense. Now they can go ahead being what they really have been through most of this week here in Miami Beach, basically tourists. They have had no conflicts of any moment to resolve. That one this afternoon guarantees that the Republican Party will remain pretty much in the control of the people who have had control of it for a long time. Those from rural states, from small states, and too, in terms of the presidential nominating process, from the South. So now there's not much to do down here but relax and laugh and have fun, which is apparently what they're all going to do. The presidential nominating speeches will be made tonight by Governor Rockefeller as a display of party unity. He was, of course, involved on the losing side of that mild controversy this afternoon, but he will place the president's name in nomination tonight. And I think the big thing for us to do is just wait here for the magic moment when the bombardment of balloons actually occurs. Now to the other side of the hall and my colleague, Ted Koppel.
Thank you, Frank. I think the only murmur of dissent that we're likely to hear tonight, you may be hearing already, and that's from those good delegates who are sitting behind me and whose view I'm blocking momentarily. But basically, this is a family affair here this evening. All the dissent, as Frank Reynolds has just told you, was taken care of this afternoon. I would assume that the largest problem that any delegate has had here today was what to wear for this evening's session. There are banners and posters all over the convention floor, but those obviously are all for Mr. Nixon and Mr. Agnew. They have also distributed and given out, there is on each seat one of these tally rosters, a tally sheet. I assume that's more a matter of courtesy than necessity. Everyone here knows how the vote is going to come out. Basically, all that's left now is for the words of rhetoric to go floating up to the ceiling, and those balloons that Frank was telling you about, which are now hanging from the rafters, to come tumbling down on the assembled delegates. I suppose the best way to describe this group would be to say that if Norman Rockwell were to paint a family portrait of an American convention, these would be his subjects. This is Ted Koppel.
The only bit of party dissent behind them, the Republicans returned tonight to do the thing they like to do most, nominate an incumbent president with a good chance of winning. This session, like all the rest, opened with flags and Boy Scouts, and here is how it was.
Delegates and alternates, the fourth session of this great convention will now come to order. And I ask all of you to take your seats. I implore each and every one of you to clear the aisles.
The color guard of Boy Scouts crossed the convention floor. This is the way every session opens.
Moments later, Mrs. Nixon and her daughters Julie and Tricia entered the hall. They drew a lot of attention, but not nearly as much as presidential advisor Henry Kissinger, who showed up at about the same time.
From the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Honorable Margaret Heckler.
I do not say that the Republican Party is the only avenue to the full and final realization of equality for women. I do say it is a significant avenue. It is attuned to the voices of women across this land. We will be heard.
The voice in the background was Margaret Heckler, Congresswoman from Massachusetts, speaking in favor of women's rights, which have been heard a great deal about here.
There was a youth rally for President Nixon in Key Biscayne tonight, and we'll have a report when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
This is sharp, cutting steel. And this is the new Goodyear Custom Power Cushion Polysteel tire. We're demonstrating the penetration resistance of steel cord belts under the tread. Steel against polysteel. To soak up the shocks, a body of tough, flexible polyester cord. And to resist penetration, double belts of strong, protective steel cord. Cut upon cut, yet the new long-wearing Goodyear Custom Power Cushion Polysteel tire keeps going without loss of air. Polyester for smooth ride, steel for protection. If it doesn't say Goodyear, it can't be polysteel.
Young people, as you cannot but have noticed, have been very much a part of this convention. They filled the galleries last night with a salute to the First Lady. This afternoon, they were taken to the airport in chartered buses to welcome the President. Tonight, the Republican youth have gathered in their own separate rally at Marine Stadium, not far from the President's home at Key Biscayne. Dick Shoemaker is with them.
Oh, the candy man makes everything he bakes satisfying and delicious. Talk about your childhood wishes. You can even eat the dishes.
We're here at the Marine Stadium, just south of the convention hall, where the young voters for the president are whooping it up. We just heard a little bit of Sammy Davis Jr., and right now Bobby Goldsboro is on the stage singing. And the big highlight of the evening for the young voters, of course, was the appearance of Tricia Cox and her husband, Edward.
Seeing all of you here at the convention gives the entire Nixon family and millions of Americans of all ages, young and old, across the country, great confidence in the present and great hope for the future.
After making a few brief remarks, Mrs. Cox then moved quickly down the aisles, saying hello, shaking hands with a few of the young voters for the president, doing everything a young lady should who's trying to see that her father is reelected as president of the United States. This is Dick Shoemaker.
Some of the young people who oppose President Nixon and his policies have been demonstrating today outside the convention hall. More than 200 were arrested in a confrontation with police, and others are still demonstrating this evening. Say there were about more than 200 pulled in after Chief Rocky Pomerantz of the Miami Beach Police decided that they were interfering with the rights of citizens. As they marched outside the convention hall this evening, they were staging guerrilla theater, portraying what they called the Street Without Shame, which is the old French name for Highway 1 in Vietnam. They had an elephant pulling a large black coffin, a variety of other floats, allegedly symbolizing the atrocities in Vietnam. At one point, they set fire to an American flag. The Miami police stepped in and rescued the flag, or what was left of it. Some of the demonstrators also lay down on the streets, meaning to symbolize the results of the American bombing, but it also blocked traffic lanes at a time when delegates were heading for the convention hall. ABC's Gregory Jackson has been covering the demonstration all through the day, and we switch to him now for a report.
Behind me is a band shell set up and the street people sitting directly in front of Convention Hall. They did that last night. Series of anti-war and protest speakers. Jane Fonda just finished. Daniel Ellsberg's expected. Dave Dillinger, Rennie Davis, other well-known protest speakers. And through the day, we've been here for 2 months with these street people rather steadily. But in a sense, this is really the first night. I don't mean that it's been particularly violent or extraordinarily eventful, but through the day, and especially this evening, you've been able to feel a level of hostility rising, like a temperature going up. It's a sense of frustration. These young people have not really come up before. They did not in the Democratic Convention. They've not been able to evoke what they feel is the proper response. Many of them come from universities where not much more than a handful attacking the soft belly of that university system have been able to close it down. But here in Miami Beach, the police are far better organized than the street people, and you attack this convention and you get nothing. However, there was one event this evening. The delegates, many of them were forced to walk through what amounted to a gauntlet of these young people screaming at them as murderers and so on. And I suspect the terror I saw in some of those eyes will not soon be forgotten. This is Gregory Jackson outside Convention Hall.
Back here in Convention Hall, 2 members of the White House inner circle of advisors are on the floor tonight. Henry Kissinger, the foreign policy expert, and his domestic affairs counterpart, John Ehrlichman. Frank Reynolds talked with both men tonight. First, Dr. Kissinger.
Have you seen any of these youngsters out here demonstrating, Dr. Kissinger?
I only got in this afternoon when the president arrived, and I haven't seen any of the demonstrations.
I know that your main task is to think about the country's foreign policy, but
right.
What do you think about the level of dissent in the country right now? I mean, the people concerned about the war. I'm thinking of these young people outside here, you know.
Look, I'm a former college professor, and therefore what the young people think means a great deal to me. And Vietnam has been an anguishing experience. I would like to think that when they know all the facts, they'll not necessarily agree with every last thing that was done, but that they will believe that their government made a major effort to end the war on decent terms. And we have to be judged by what they think of us a few years from now and not just by what they think tonight.
Well, I asked Henry Kissinger about this earlier tonight. Did you see any of these young people demonstrating out here?
I did yesterday. Not today, but I did yesterday.
What are you going to do about this sort of thing, Mr. Ehrlichman? How can you still this dissent? I mean, satisfied.
Well, Frank, I think we have to think back to 4 years ago, and we have to see how far we've come. I don't know if people have a vivid recollection of the time of Cambodia and Kent State and that kind of thing, but if you think back to that time and you reflect on how things were then and how they are now, here's a situation where we have about 1,000 to 2,000 young activists in this park and out front here, where, what was it 4 years ago in Chicago? 100,000, something of that kind. And the time was when they were coming to Washington in the hundreds of thousands. I can remember one time when they counted 300,000 in Washington. And now they have trouble raising 5,000 to come out and do this kind of thing, and they're mostly full-timers.
Down on the floor now, they're calling the roll of states to see who wants to nominate somebody for president. Mrs. Ann Armstrong, the co-chairman of the party, is calling the roll. And eventually, New York will say Governor Rockefeller wants to nominate somebody. And Harry, I hope that he doesn't do what he did in 1960 when he stood up and said, I want to nominate the man everybody knows, Richard F. Nixon.
No, I don't think he will. I think he knows a good deal about Richard Nixon at this point. I was interested in the report on the demonstrators. They are not making it so far in terms of what they wanted to do and getting a lot of attention in this convention. I was out tonight and looking at them. They're, in terms of being a demonstrator, in terms of trying to get across what they want to get across without taking sides, they're doing very nicely. They're well behaved, they're well made up, they have a definite thing they want to get across, but nobody seems to care. And they don't seem to care. There aren't that many of them, and there's no problem.
They seem to be suffering from an illusion. We interviewed one last night, I think, and he said we want to repeat our success of 68. Well, I think he has forgotten that the result in 68 was the defeat of a liberal Democratic candidate for president and the nomination of a conservative Republican for president.
Which they seem to want to do again. Well, we'll see. We'll have more on the Republican story when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
And now a message from the Ford Motor Company.
This country club in San Francisco is one of the world's most famous. We came here to find out which cars have the more comfortable ride, the 1972 Continentals or that other American luxury car. The judges were all owners of that other luxury car. Nationwide Consumer Testing Institute blindfolded each owner, then took them for a test ride. They tested that other sedan against the Lincoln Continental. They tested that other personal luxury car against the Mark IV. Then they compared the cars for smoothness, steadiness, and quietness.
The Lincoln was much smoother and quieter. It kind of floated.
The Mark IV was quite a lot better. It was just the better ride, that's all.
All in all, 60 out of 100 owners of the other luxury car said that the Continentals had a more comfortable ride.
In all fairness to the test, the Continentals were superior.
The 1972 Continentals. We'd say the best cars won.
Rehearsals for the Julie Andrews Hour began July 12th, and not everything went according to the script.
Keep it down.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to get this.
We put together a backstage personal portrait of a star preparing for a new series. And we've given it her name, Julie, a 1-hour special.
Thursday night on ABC.
The Republicans are trying hard these 3 days to reach out for every possible block of voters. Tonight, the appeal was made to that massive group of Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else known as Western movie fans. On the podium, old True Grit, John Wayne himself. His forehead screwed up in that familiar look of tolerant pain for humanity. His job was to introduce the feature film about another Westerner named Nixon.
I came here because I believe that all my heart that Richard Nixon is the right man in the right office at the right time. We spend most of our lives trying to figure out the good guys from the bad guys. And we usually find out that most of us are a little bit of each. But in the last few years, I've seen enough to know that Richard Nixon is a good guy, a decent man, and a great president. I'm proud that we have a president who realized the necessity of dialogue with our apparent enemy, and he was a man bold enough to go seek him out and attempt to get an honest reading on him, eye to eye, and bold enough to stand by our less fortunate friends in Vietnam in spite of the pressure of political opponents who, by their legislative and administrative actions, caused the monstrous problem which faces our president. Now, that's my kind of a man. I'm going to vote for him, I'm going to work for him, and I'm going to pray for him.
In case you haven't heard, the Republican convention watched one film about Richard Nixon and his presidency last night, and the viewers of the three networks watched another one, including an edited version that we put on. And how that happened is one of those interesting things which shows that politicians are really no smarter than television people when it comes down to picking films. They showed the one last night to the hall that they meant to show tonight. Tonight they are showing the one that they meant to show last night. Last night, the people watching television saw the one that was supposed to be shown last night, and tonight, the one being shown on television, except that we aren't showing it, is the one that wasn't shown.
Harry, I think Nelson Rockefeller is about to be called on to nominate the Richard Nixon for president. We go down to the floor.
Cabinet of President Eisenhower and the governor of that great state for a long, long time and made it a better state every year. The governor of the state of New York, Nelson Rockefeller.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Nixon, members of this great Republican convention, fellow Americans. 4 years ago, we met here in Miami. America was torn by violence at home. America was in deep trouble abroad. Inflation was eating away at the hard-earned wages and lifetime savings of those who have built America. There were riots in our cities. There was chaos on the campuses. Grim, escalating war was claiming the lives of thousands of Americans, young Americans, and was tearing our nation apart. That same grim war was straining our ties with the rest of the world. Faith in America itself was being questioned, not only by people overseas, but by Americans here at home. Today, we meet in happier circumstances. Certainly, serious and complex difficulties still confront us. But there is renewed confidence in America abroad. And even more important, renewed confidence in America by Americans here at home. This has been due, importantly, to one man, our president. This has been achieved by his determination and decisive leadership, his experienced handling of the staggering problems which he inherited 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there were 550,000 American fighting men in South Vietnam. Today, there are less than 40,000. Four years ago, inflation raged uncontrolled in an overheated war economy. Today, with wage price controls and the rapid progress towards a peacetime economy, the rate of inflation has already been cut in half. 4 years ago, the Soviet Union and the United States appeared to be on a collision course. Today, we're working together in science, in technology, in health, in environment, in outer space, and in trade. 4 years ago, there was a great wall between mainland China and America. Today, we are in productive and increasingly active communications. 4 years ago, daily shelling and raiding in the Middle East threatened another world war. Today, U.S.-sponsored ceasefire has been in effect 2 years, and there is hope for peace. 4 years ago, we were headed towards environmental disaster. Today, the whole nation is mobilizing to protect and restore our environment. In each instance, the President has met these crises through decisive action. Thank you. At the same time, he has acted to meet the challenge of change. The President recognized that the patterns of the past, the concepts of the past, and the establishments of the past were no longer adequate to meet the needs of today and the challenges of tomorrow. And so 4 years ago, he set out to achieve fundamental changes in our concepts and relations, both internationally and here at home. He brought new initiatives and new programs, federal revenue sharing to strengthen state and local government services for the people, welfare reform to help those in need and to protect the taxpayers, reorganization of the bureaucratic federal grant and aid system to cut waste and red tape, the restructuring of the federal government itself to make it more manageable and more responsive to human needs. And most significantly, with his deep concern for people and their changing problems, the President has completely revised our nation's priorities. In 1948, he inherited a federal budget which allocated 45% for national defense and only 32% for human resources. Today, 4 years later, he has completely revised and reversed the emphasis, with 45% of the federal budget for human resources and 32% for national defense. All right, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, he has done this without sacrificing our national security and world leadership. The human resource budget has been doubled. It provides greater support than ever before to the basic areas of human concern, so essential to achieve human dignity and the brotherhood of man. They include civil rights, equal opportunity, education, health, and the fight against drugs. In addition, there have been great increases in housing, community development, and crime control. No president or administration has done more to help meet these needs. The needs of our great cities, the needs of our suburban communities, the needs which concern all of our people. The President has also taken bold action to achieve international agreements to open up new areas of trade and to protect American workers in the face of growing foreign competition. Together, all these far-reaching steps are bringing about a new era of peacetime prosperity. Witness the 2.5 million increase in jobs for American workers in the past 12 months alone. Witness the 4% gain this year in real wages, increased purchasing power for American workers, the most significant gain since runaway inflation was started 7 years ago. These accomplishments at home, these accomplishments abroad, have not happened by themselves. While others talked, the President acted. While others merely wrung their hands, he had the courage and the ability to face the hard realities, to initiate new approaches, and to bring about solutions. While others despaired, he worked to end the war in Vietnam. He stood firm in the Middle East. He traveled to Peking. He journeyed to Moscow. And while others dealt with vague generalities about disarmament, he made the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty a reality. In short, the President has brought us to the threshold of a generation of peace. Even as he works and plans for a century of peace ahead. This is skilled management and leadership of a high order. It is this leadership and these accomplishments that bring me before you at this convention to make a nomination. This country and the world need the continued leadership of our President. I say to you, delegates, and to you, my fellow citizens of America, we need this man. We need this man of action, this man of accomplishments, this man of experience, this man of courage, this man of faith in America. It is my great honor to nominate Richard Nixon for re-election as the next President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you.
Governor Rockefeller, who, as far as I know, did not nominate anybody before for president, took a little bit over about 3 times the amount of time that he was allotted in the schedule to nominate Richard Nixon. We were making some notes on who nominated Richard Nixon before. It's the 5th time that he's been nominated at a national convention. Senator William Nolan of California nominated him in 1952 for vice president. Governor Christian Herter, who later on was Secretary of State, nominated him in 1956 for vice president, the year when he might have been dropped. Governor Mark Hatfield of Oregon, later his political enemy, nominated him for president in 1960. In 1968, he was nominated by a relatively unknown governor of Maryland named Spiro T. Agnew.
Harry, there are now going to be 11 seconders to that nomination speech.
But they're listed for times as short as 30 seconds.
The first one is Jody Smith of Iowa, a delegate from Iowa named Jody Smith,
who happens to be the youngest mayor in the country. If you can call being mayor of Ayrshire, Iowa, a town of 300, being the youngest mayor in the country. There's no allotment in the precise schedule that we happen to have tonight. Illegitimately, there's no allotment for the length of this demonstration between the nomination and the 9 or 10 seconding speeches. But we are running, the seconding speeches are supposed to begin at 9:48 Eastern Time. It is 10:07, which sounds like 12:07, about 19 minutes late. Not bad for a convention.
You will have a great opportunity in a very few minutes to participate in the actual nomination and selection. So I ask you, please, may we proceed. The great governor of the Empire State has placed in nomination the name of Richard Nixon on behalf of the Republican Party for presidency of the United States. And now the chair recognizes the delegate from Iowa for the seconding of the name of Richard Nixon, Mayor Jody Smith from the state of Iowa. Mayor Smith.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jody Smith, and I am 19. As the mayor of Ayrshire, Iowa, and as the youngest mayor in the United States, I am concerned about the future of our communities and our country. I believe that today, more than ever, we must have a president who has earned by performance the trust and respect of Americans of all ages. And I believe that Richard Nixon is such a man. I have talked with him, I have followed his record, and I am convinced that he is the one to lead America into a better future with wisdom and moderation. So this evening, I am proud to second the nomination of the candidate who is the man for all Americans, Richard M. Nixon.
Jody Smith is the mayor of Ayrshire. When we had him on the air on the ABC Evening News not long ago, because Ayrshire is one of those towns that has been right in its vote on president ever since 1908 or 1904.
Recognizes, for the purposes of a seconding speech, an outstanding public servant, conservationist, a delegate from Alaska, a former governor of Alaska, a former cabinet member in the presidency of Richard Nixon. It's a privilege and a pleasure in a very personal way to recognize the Honorable Walter Hickel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be one of the first to nominate the president, because as you might recall, I was the last one in and the first one out. And although I didn't agree with all the actions of this administration, I am sure that they likewise didn't agree with all of mine. But the real excitement came this past year when we made the gesture toward China and Russia. not just recognizing them as people, but giving us a ray of light and hope where there was just darkness brought on by fear and hate. And with this progressive enlightened attitude, the hopes for peace for all mankind was enhanced. And now America is turning its hopes to those things of everyday concern that have frustrated a great nation. The filth in our cities, the lack of credibility at all levels, the whirlpool of the family debt, the disbelief in the eyes of the young and the black, and those in the factories, and those on relief. But I see an attitude that opened up a closed world, now opening up and uniting America. This I see happening. And it's with this hope, the hope of the young of all ages, that I second the nomination for the presidency of the United States, Richard Nixon.
Walter Hickel was fired by President Nixon from the cabinet. That was remarkable. We'll continue with the seconding speeches in just a moment.
Hey, Mom, can I get something cold to drink? All right, but stay out of that refrigerator. Wow, look at that. Wow, that door's got ice coming out of it. It's even crunching up the ice. I never saw anything like that before. Wow. You're not in that refrigerator, are you?
Only General Electric delivers ice and cold water to your door. General Electric, America's #1 major appliance value.
Sharp, piercing steel. The new Goodyear Custom Power Cushion Polysteel tire. Steel against polysteel, a stabbing torture demonstration. But the polyester cord body soaks up the shocks, and double steel cord belts resist penetration under the tread. The tire keeps on going without loss of air. Polyester for smooth ride, steel for protection. Polysteel only from Goodyear.
Our coverage of Convention 72 will continue following station identification.
Starting in September, the adventures of a new generation of lawmen, the Rookies, on ABC.
WSIX TV, Nashville, Tennessee.
The Blue Angels, the world-famous precision flying team, will be here August 26th and 27th at the Nashville Aviation Day's annual air show. The air show, sponsored by the Donaldson Rotary Club, brings back the famed Blue Angels, who have thrilled millions of spectators with their spectacular demonstrations of precision aerobatic and formation flying. This year, they'll be flying the Mach 2 Phantoms that can climb 4 miles in 48 seconds, that consumes enough fuel in 60 seconds to drive an average car 3,000 miles, that can fly from St. Louis to Chicago in 12 minutes. Don't miss this chance to see these jet fighters streak across the staging area at Smyrna Airport, Saturday and Sunday, August 26th and 27th. Gates open each day at 10 a.m.
Speeches for President Nixon's nomination are continuing. Meanwhile, down at Marine Stadium, the rally for Republican youth is continuing. It's possible that the president may turn up there. Down there is ABC's White House correspondent Tom Gerald. Tom?
The noise you hear is enough to make a Secret Service man stay awake at night. It's fireworks, and it is fireworks in the vicinity of President Nixon. We are at the Marine Stadium at Crandon Park on Key Biscayne. This location is only about a half a mile from the president's home, and at the moment, we understand, President Nixon is traveling by boat across the water around underneath the causeway and coming here where they have a stage set up with a hard rock band, which has been playing for the last couple of hours for a group of very hot, sweaty, enthusiastic young people. About 6,500 have assembled here to hear a lot of hard rock music that's enough to drive the fish right out of the pond. But the young people are enjoying it. They've been dancing, they've been applauding, and they are now very anxiously awaiting the arrival of the president. The fireworks which have been put off here were to mark the moment at the convention proper over in Miami Beach when Mr. Nixon was renominated. So they know here he has been renominated. They know that he is coming here to have a few remarks to the young people who have gathered here. This is the president's second appeal today and second remarks today directed to young people, as he looks, of course, to those approximately 22 million young American voters between the ages of 18 and 24 who have never had an opportunity to vote and will be looking this year to determine whether they should vote Democrat or Republican. This is Tom Gerald, ABC News at the Marine Park on Key Biscayne.
We'll go back to the Marine Stadium when the president arrives there. Meanwhile, the speeches are going on, the 30-second seconding speeches for the nomination of President Nixon, the two most interesting of which are Walter Hickel, who was Secretary of Interior and who was flatly fired from the cabinet by President Nixon some time ago. And the second most interesting is James Buckley, who is not even a member of the Republican Party. He is a member of the Conservative Party. He, too, is making a speech.
But he's been admitted to the Republican caucus and obviously has been admitted to the number of people that President Nixon thinks he needs. I think it's interesting that on this night, the president is going back to see the young people. That's a matter of emphasis, and also working fairly carefully with this very precise scheduling. He should be appearing before the young people at just about the time when it will not interfere with any national coverage of the convention, because after these 9 or 10 or 11 seconding speeches finish, the schedule calls for a roll call of states. It's supposed to take about 10 minutes, and it says here the president should be officially nominated when the roll reaches Missouri, and then it says, for the guidance of the permanent chairman, at the announcement of the Missouri vote, or whichever state officially nominates the president, a demonstration will begin. They'll allow that to go for 12 minutes, and then Congressman Ford will say, please come to order, please clear the aisles. It may be necessary to put a lot of people out into the aisles so that he can say that. We'll see.
And when basic training is over, you go into combat.
When the basic training is over, you go into combat. We'll be back with more of this when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to vote. But there's plenty in here to convince you that you should. Time, the weekly news magazine.
Sharp, ripping steel. The new Goodyear Custom Power Cushion Polysteel tire. Steel against polysteel. A tough torture demonstration. But the polyester cord body soaks up the shocks, and double steel cord belts resist penetration under the tread. The tire keeps on going without loss of air. Polyester for smooth ride, steel for protection. Polysteel, only from Goodyear.
Down on the floor, Mr. Manuel Lujan of New Mexico is seconding the nomination of Richard Nixon. We go down to the floor to hear him.
American people together. Because of his leadership, America is now achieving what New Mexico long ago achieved, a society of diverse backgrounds whose members are proud of their different origins, but equally proud of the American ideals that unite them. Señor Presidente, en nombre del pueblo de Nuevo México y de los hispanoparlantes en los Estados Unidos, es un orgullo para mí secundar la nominación del presidente Richard Nixon. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the state of New Mexico, I am proud to second the nomination of President Richard Nixon.
Thank you very, very much, Congressman Manuel Lujan of the great state of New Mexico. And now, delegates and alternates, we are really and very truly honored to have as our next seconding speaker an unusual but very wonderful member of our political family. A little different than some of us, but in our visiting dignitaries box this evening, the chair is pleased to recognize the First Lady of America's 11th largest city, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Mrs. Henry Meyer, who is being introduced as the wife of the mayor of Milwaukee, who last month spoke in this same hall to the Democrats in endorsing them. She is president of the Democrats for Nixon in her city.
And now a co-chairman of the Democrats for Nixon, Mrs. Henry Meyer. Mrs. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, official family, the Wisconsin delegation, ladies and gentlemen. I am here because I'm more nervous and frightened for America than myself. As a matter of conscience, I have been a proud and active member of the Democratic Party. 4 weeks ago, I stood in this hall and watched, heartbroken, while our party was pulled away from the principles that make it such a vital part of the American political process, only to concern itself with domestic moralities and turn its back on the urban crisis. I think America needs to know about this crisis. The leader who most understands the needs of the people is President Richard Nixon. The President, along with my husband, the other mayors, and congressional leaders, pushed hard for a revenue-sharing bill to put the money of America to work on the biggest domestic problem of America. The needy, the ghettos, the overtaxed property owner, and the worried businessmen are hoping the Senate will share the dream for the benefit of all America. I stand here not as a prodigal Democrat, but one of countless thousands of Democrats and Republicans alike who want the many programs of a successful president to continue. And I find it my humble privilege to second the nomination of Richard Nixon. Thank you.
Mrs. Henry Meyer, the wife of the Democratic mayor of Milwaukee, seconding the nomination of Richard Nixon. We understand that on the podium, Chairman Gerald Ford has broken 2 gavels tonight, gaveling for order. He's on the 3rd and last gavel the Republican Party at present possesses. We'll have more when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
A brutal match of the Goodyear Custom Power Cushion Polysteel tire against sharpened fire axes.
That axe is actually protruding through that rubber.
Well, certainly there's no air loss in that thing because a pretty good chunk of rubber is just taken out of there.
This torture demonstration shows how double steel cord belts resist penetration under the tread.
I think it's probably as effective a demonstration as you can find. It's made a believer out of me.
If it doesn't say Goodyear, it can't be polysteel.
General Electric presents the world's first refrigerator to give you ice, crushed ice, and cold water without even opening a door. And when you open the doors, there's a frost-free refrigerator and freezer with easy-to-clean, adjustable tempered glass shelves. Why open and close a refrigerator door when you don't have to? General Electric, America's #1 major appliance value.
Applauded for its concept, acclaimed for its production, admired for its success. This September, Movie of the Week expands its success story to 2 evenings. The Tuesday and Wednesday Movie of the Week. 2 exciting world television premieres every week. This September, the Tuesday and Wednesday Movie of the Week.
Seems to me there are a couple of questions in this list of 11 seconders that I hope we're going to be able to answer in the next few minutes. I guess we probably won't answer how Walter Hickel came back into favor with the Nixon administration. And I guess we won't find out exactly how James Buckley stands and if he's going to be a Republican from now on. Before too long, we do hope to find out a couple of things would seem to me interesting about Mrs. Meyer, like where is Mr. Meyer and how does he feel about all this. But in the meantime, there is the situation in the New Mexico delegation, which has to cast 1 vote for Paul McCloskey and is ambivalent about it, I guess. And for that, we'll go to our ambivalent floor reporter, Ted Koppel.
Thank you, Harry. Congressman Manuel Lujan, whom we just saw delivering that seconding speech for President Nixon, is here in a double capacity this evening. In his capacity as chairman of the New Mexico delegation, he will also be casting that 1 very lonely vote for Congressman Paul McCloskey. As he puts it, he doesn't think he'd go to jail if he cast all of New Mexico's 14 votes for President Nixon, and he himself is a Nixon supporter, as evidenced his seconding speech for the president. But he's going to cast that 1 vote, and then he tells me, after checking with his lawyer first, and he did, he tells me that if they ask to make this a vote or a nomination by acclamation later on in the evening, that he will take that 1 vote back and make it 1,348 for President Nixon. I'm sure we can all now sigh a huge sigh of relief. This is Ted Koppel.
I think one thing we've been proud of so far, Howard, is absolutely objective in both these conventions. However, being objective, I must say, how far can you trust a party which doesn't seem to have the slightest idea of the relative ranks of American cities? Last night, one of the introducers, I think it was Governor Reagan, introduced the mayor of Indianapolis as the mayor of America's 10th city. And as all of us from Minneapolis know, that's ridiculous. Indianapolis turned out to be 29th. And just a few minutes ago, with the light of truth shining in his eyes, Congressman Ford proudly introduced the wife of the mayor of Milwaukee, which he said is America's 11th city. Well, Milwaukee is not America's 11th city. It has its 3rd baseball team in some years, and it has all kinds of other problems, and it's only 19th. It is a magnificent city which produces the country's best beer, but it is not 11th, it's 19th.
This will all come out in the campaign. And we're going to have more observations, penetrating as that, when our coverage of Convention 72, when our coverage continues in just a moment.
And now a message from the Ford Motor Company.
In the last 3 months, 3 million people have bought new cars. And it looks like 1972 will stand out as an all-time record sales year. Now, what does this mean? Simply that tomorrow alone, probably more than 30,000 of us are going to go out and make the 2nd biggest purchase of our lives. Now, if that includes you, Ford Motor Company thinks you ought to arm yourself with a few facts. Let's face it, there's a lot to choose from out there. And the idea is to make that range of models and options work for you, not against you, and it can. That's why Ford Motor Company has written this book, Car Buying Made Easier. The information applies to buying any make of car, not just a Ford, Lincoln, or Mercury car. And it helps you come up with the right answers by helping you ask the right questions. Everything from which options to how much engine, what it's going to cost. Car Buying Made Easier. You'll find it helpful whether you buy in a month or 6 months. For your free copy, write Ford Motor Company Listens, the American Road, Dearborn, Michigan. They listen better, and they like to send it to you.
Our coverage of Convention 72 will continue following station identification.
The Men, 3 adventure dramas starting in September on ABC.
Here we are, Sam, another election year. Yeah. Lots of people to cover, lots of issues to dig into.
Sure are, Chuck, but I'll bet there'll still be some people who'll say, how come you don't give my candidate an even break?
There must be some way to let them know that television's got to give all the qualified candidates an equal opportunity.
Uh-huh.
Some way to tell them how television tries to show all sides of the important issues.
Yeah, but how?
Why not go on television?
WSIX TV, Nashville, Tennessee.
We have a report down on the floor from our floor correspondent, Herbert Kaplow. I'm not sure what it is, but let's find out. Kaplow?
I am standing at the California standard where the California Governor Ronald Reagan is seated. Governor Herb Kaplow from ABC. How are you, sir?
Fine.
Governor, we are seeing a parade of seconders, nominators who represent, I suppose, the whole political spectrum of the Republican Party. You are associated with a particular part of the spectrum, the more conservative element. How does this sort of panoply here strike you?
Well, I think it's something that's happened back through our history when you have an incumbent president, and it has happened to both parties. You can't just invent suspense and pretend that you're not going to renominate a very successful president, a man who has a great record as president. So we've made no pretense. We have come here to renominate Richard Nixon. But I would think that the constant effort to make things appear dull, when you look at the floor and you look at the delegates, you look at their enthusiasm, you look at all those young people over there in the stands, I find it kind of exciting.
Thank you very much, Governor. We'll see you again later. I'm Herbert Kaplow.
And now the next and final seconding speaker will be Frank Borman, the astronaut who was in the first American craft to orbit the moon in December of 1968, appearing this time without Jules Bergman.
As we come to the close of the seconding of the nomination on behalf of President Nixon, we are calling upon one of our great present-day heroes in our nation, a man who stirred the soul, and I really mean it, of America when he read those ringing words of the Bible from a far corner of the universe, and who has helped our nation to explore outer space and to conquer that universe. He's not only an astronaut par excellence, he is an outstanding citizen, and the chair is honored to recognize Mr. Frank Borman from the state of Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As a former participant in this country's space program, I can assure you all that none of our triumphs were casual in nature. It's equally obvious, I think, that the resurgence of confidence and capabilities that we've seen in the past 4 years in this country were not due to the swing of some mysterious pendulum. They're due to the efforts, the dedication of the American people, ably led by President Nixon. And in the most demanding of jobs, he's persevered, he's succeeded, he's triumphed. But even more important to me is his concept of this country's destiny, his belief that freedom and peace on this small but precious planet we call Earth is directly dependent on the moral and physical strength of the United States of America. I second the nomination of President Nixon.
Sam Donaldson, I'm with Frank Borman, who just
Thank you
seconded
very
the
much.
President's renomination. Why did you decide to do this?
Because I believe in Mr. Nixon, I believe in the program that he stands for, and I have had the opportunity, the very fortunate opportunity, to get to know him personally since I've been involved in the space program. And although I was never politically inclined before, the man has frankly captivated me, and I have a great admiration for him.
Well, now, you started life as a Democrat, did you not?
Yes, I voted always in the military. I was careful not to be partisan, but in many of the states that I served in, they were essentially one-party states, and if you wanted to participate in the primary, you voted registered Democratic and voted.
But what about the thing that must be closest to your heart, the space program? Will it really fare better under a Nixon administration in the next 4 years than under a McGovern administration?
Without question. Now, but on the other hand, I would not support Mr. Nixon solely on the basis of his support for the space program. I honestly believe, and I think a lot of Americans believe now, that the choice is really clear, and I'm not at all prepared to back Mr. McGovern in any case. I've been fortunate enough to speak around the country and over 2 dozen colleges. I think I've got a sense of the kids, and I think we have a lot going for us in this country, and I'm not prepared to change course that dramatically.
Thank you very much, Frank Borman.
The balloting will now proceed with all the suspense of the arrival of, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. However, it will be historic because this will be the first time that any man has ever been nominated 5 times to be on a major party's presidential, vice presidential ticket. We know enough to know that Missouri, the state of Missouri, will put Nixon over the top and give him a majority, the majority he needs for nomination.
So it says in the schedule, but they also have an alternative. If it doesn't, they say whenever he gets over the top. The Republicans are still going on the old-fashioned alphabetical way. The Democrats drew lots as to see how the state should vote. And Missouri is about as early as you can get nominated if you go alphabetically. In 1968, it took all the way to Wisconsin to put Mr. Nixon over the top. In 1964, it took South Carolina for Goldwater. In 1960, Mr. Nixon got it in Louisiana. Tonight, probably Missouri. And we'll be picking up the balloting and the suspense that is involved there when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
Steel against polysteel, steel bits, steel blades, and sharp steel machetes against new Goodyear custom power cushion polysteel tires, demonstrating the penetration resistance of steel cord belts under the tread of each of these tires. And every time, these Goodyear polysteel tires came through without loss of air. The smooth ride of polyester, the protection of double steel belts with the new polysteel tire, only from Goodyear.
It's time to care about the meaning behind the words. Read about the issues behind the talk. Know about the person behind the voice. This is the year to make your voice heard. Time, the weekly news magazine.
Well, the balloting for the nomination of the Republican candidate for President of the United States is proceeding without suspense, but with historical significance, and we'll go down to the podium to hear it.
Madam Chairman, Connecticut, the Constitution state, historically the first state to report its election results to the nation, a state which will elect Richard Nixon on November, is proud to cast 22 votes for President Nixon.
Connecticut, 22 votes for Richard Nixon.
Delaware, 12 votes.
Delaware, the state that started the nation, cast 12 votes for President Nixon.
Delaware, 12 votes for Richard Nixon.
District of Columbia, 9 votes.
The District of Columbia, the nation's capital, casts 9 votes for its resident president, Richard Nixon.
That is Mrs. Ann Armstrong, co-chairman of the Republican National Committee.
40 votes.
Florida proudly cast 40 votes for the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, Richard M. Nixon.
Florida, 40 votes for Richard Nixon.
Florida's voted
24 votes.
Republican.
The state of Georgia is unanimous in its support for Richard Nixon for president and Fletcher Thompson for U.S. Senator. We cast all of our votes for both of them.
Georgia, 24 votes for
phrase,
Richard
the
Nixon.
greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, is something like President Nixon said about the landing on the moon, the greatest event since the creation. In each case, you might have some argument, I suppose, from defenders of, Republican defenders of Theodore Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, probably not Calvin Coolidge, but maybe.
Did he say the greatest Republican president?
He said the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln.
I would say that Franklin D. Roosevelt might possibly have an objection.
President Nixon's strong national defense policies, Guam USA casted 3 votes for President Richard M. Nixon.
The assumption is that Mr. Nixon will get every vote except one, the vote that is required by the results of the New Mexico primary to be cast for Paul McCloskey.
And a paradise of the Pacific is proud to cast all of its 14 votes for Richard M. Nixon.
That was Senator Hiram Fong of Hawaii,
who was nominated for president in 1968.
So he was.
Idaho, 14 votes.
Madam Chairman, the state of Idaho cast 14 votes for President Nixon.
Governor Norbert Tiemann, I think.
Our research indicates that the Republicans do more than the Democrats try to select their tend to select their president on the first ballot. In the 29 Republican conventions before this, they picked a presidential candidate on the first ballot 19 times, 2 out of every 3. The Democrats are about half and half, and the Democrats went what, 102 in 1924, 1920?
103, I'm sorry. So far, the longest number of ballots the Republicans have had was in Chicago when Garfield was nominated.
32 votes.
You look at that.
Madam Secretary, Indiana.
When you look at the super on the screen, others don't seem to have much of a chance so far.
Proudly cast 32 votes for Richard M. Nixon.
I think the last-minute rally for Harold Stassen may surprise you.
Indiana, 32 votes for
He's not been here at all.
Iowa,
The son is here.
22 votes.
Madam Chairman, Iowa very proudly casts its 22 votes for the re-election of President Richard Nixon.
Iowa, 22 votes for Richard Nixon.
Kansas.
While this balloting continues, before we reach the crucial point when the demonstration begins, we'd like to pause a moment. We'll be back with the voting. Our coverage of Convention 72 continues.
Richard M. Nixon.
Kentucky, 24 votes.
Meet Roland Leong, champion drag racer. Why is he so loyal to Shell gasoline?
I use Shell gas in my personal car, truck, which I haul my race car on, a mini bike, and my lawnmower.
Roland drives about 75,000 miles a year, and according to his own Shell credit card receipts, averages $145 a month with Shell. Why?
Most Shell people are a lot friendlier. Most Shell service stations I think, are cleaner, and I just like the gasoline. I took the motor apart in the truck after 75,000 miles, and everything looks pretty clean.
Just ask our customers. Shell products perform.
I use Shell gasoline, and I just like it.
We're approaching the crucial moment when we expect the state of Missouri's vote will put Richard Nixon across the top in his nomination, whereupon a demonstration will happen here. Fireworks will be seen at Marine Stadium, and the president himself may appear at Marine Stadium. We go down to the floor now for the continuing of the balloting.
Enthusiastically cast 26 votes for Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Maryland, 26 votes for Richard Nixon.
Massachusetts, 34 votes.
Massachusetts is pleased to cast 34 votes for Richard M. Nixon.
Massachusetts, 34 votes for Richard Nixon.
Michigan, 48 votes.
Mr. Chairman, Michigan proudly cast 48 votes for our great President, Richard M. Nixon.
Michigan, 48 votes for Richard Nixon.
Minnesota, 26 votes.
Minnesota, with 50% women in its delegation, proudly cast 26 votes for Richard Nixon.
Minnesota, 26 votes for Richard Nixon.
Mississippi, 14 votes.
Will
Mr.
be
Chairman,
Missouri, as predicted.
the Mississippi delegation and the people of the great state of Mississippi proudly cast their 14 votes for the greatest party in this land and the greatest president.
Mississippi, 14 votes for Richard Nixon.
Missouri, 30
Now comes what?
Mr. Chairman.
It's like New Year's Eve, waiting for the ball to drop.
Mr. Chairman, Missouri, the Show Me State, shows its regard for Senator Tom Eagleton by proudly casting all its 30 votes to assure the renomination and ultimate re-election of President Richard M. Nixon.
There it is, the Missouri's revenge for Eagleton.
According to our pirated copy of the Republican schedule tonight at 10:18, 25 minutes ago, it says that announcement of Missouri vote, or whichever state officially nominates the president, demonstration begins. And so it is. Now, in 12 minutes from now, the secretary will say, please come to order.
I presume all those balloons that have been stored on the ceiling of this hall will be let loose at some point.
I think they're supposed to come after the final thing. 10:47, and the way we're running, that'll be about 25 minutes from now. The permanent chairman is supposed to say, I am informed that 1,348 votes have been cast, and we're going to appoint a committee to notify Mr. Nixon in case he hasn't heard.
Delegates and alternates. Delegates and alternates. It's very critical that we continue with the call of the state. I ask you, I plead with you, I implore with you to please sit down and permit us to continue the call of the states.
They've decided to
Mrs.
give up the 12
Armstrong will
minutes.
continue the call of the states. Thank you very much.
Missouri casts 30 votes for Richard Nixon.
Montana, 14 votes.
Madam Chairman, Montana, the land of the big sky, the state that has endorsed Richard Nixon every time he has sought national office. 1952, Montana was there. 1956, 1960, 1968, and for the fifth sweep of Montana, I'm backed up by the Blackfeet for Nixon Club and Bill Big Spring with his Indian headdress as we cast all 14 votes once again for Richard M. Nixon.
Well, they picked up 11 minutes of the roughly 25 minutes that they had lost by giving up the demonstration that they had scheduled. I think it's quite fair to say if they aren't the on-time convention, they're trying very hard.
Harry, out on just off the convention hall floor, the Republican youth movement is lined up, ready to go out on the floor to join in the Nixon demonstration when this roll call is over. And that announcement you mentioned is made. Many are carrying big plastic bags full of helium balloons, so there will be balloons going up as well as balloons coming down.
15 votes for Richard Nixon.
Nevada, 12 votes.
Nevada, the birthplace of our First Lady, Pat Nixon, cast 12 votes for the re-election of her husband, Richard Nixon.
We're now coming to the point where one vote will be cast for somebody besides Richard Nixon. New Mexico will do it.
New Hampshire, 14 votes.
New Hampshire, which is the state which has always started Richard Nixon on the road to victory, has been waiting since March 7th to cast its 14 votes for the renomination of President Nixon.
New Jersey, 40 votes.
Madam Chair, lady, the Garden State that supported Richard Nixon in 1968 is proud to cast its entire 40 votes for Richard Nixon.
New Jersey, 40 votes for Richard Nixon.
New Mexico, 14 votes.
Madam Chairman, although all 14 of New Mexico's delegates are committed to President Nixon, it is my duty, as required by state law, to cast 13 votes for President Nixon and 1 vote for Pete McCloskey.
I think they would understand that in the Kremlin.
13 votes for Richard Nixon.
That's the 99.9 kind of vote, isn't it? Yes, I think they would.
New York, 88 votes.
Down on the floor in the New Mexico delegation is Ted Koppel. Ted?
Well, there's a big crush, as you can probably see by now, around this gentleman, because he obviously has the distinction of being the only man to vote for anyone other than President Nixon. Let's listen to some of his comments. He's being questioned now.
Part of the bleachers, I believe.
Congressman, do you have any feeling of embarrassment at all about being the only man here to vote for anyone other than the president?
No, I don't feel either embarrassment or glee or anything. It's something that I must do as required by the law, and that's what I do, period.
You didn't give...
No, not once. Kind of have a feeling if we're going to make laws, we got to live up to them.
Oh, that rather matter-of-fact reaction, I think the good congressman has summed it up. That was Pete McCloskey's moment in the sun. This is Ted Koppel.
North Dakota, where it's cool and green and clean.
As this vote goes on and before the demonstration begins, we're going to take a moment out. We'll be back when our coverage of Convention 72 continues in just a moment.
And now a message from the Ford Motor Company.
This is Dr. E.L. Gibson, Enterprise, Alabama, 83 years old, still practicing medicine. He drives a Ford Pinto, but that's not surprising. Doc Gibson started out in a rugged, reliable Ford car over half a century ago.
First car I owned was a Ford Model T, like that one there. Used it to make my house calls. That car took some licking, but it got me where I had to get.
It's that same kind of car we had in mind when we built today's Ford Pinto. To stand up to rough roads, to take the worry out of the mud. You see, we built Pinto rugged and reliable to get people where they have to be. People like Doc Gibson, Enterprise, Alabama. See the Pinto at your Ford dealers. When you get back to basics, you get back to Ford.
Well, the decorous Nixon juggernaut continues, and we're going down to see it conquer the rest of those votes. Let's go down to the floor.
60
I like the phrase decorous juggernaut.
The great state of Pennsylvania, home of two great Republican senators, Senator Hugh Scott and Senator Richard Schweiker, cast all its 60 votes for the next president of the United States, Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Pennsylvania, 60 votes for Richard Nixon.
Puerto Rico, 5 votes.
Puerto Rico, crossroads of the Americas. The United States showcased in the Caribbean cast its 5 votes for a good friend, Fraser M. Nixon.
Puerto Rico has been the source for some
5 votes for Richard
attention at a couple of Republican conventions, and Puerto Rico at the moment has a Republican governor
Wrong column in 68.
in a commonwealth which is wondering how long it ought to be a commonwealth and whether it should be a state or an independent country.
8 votes for President Nixon.
Rhode Island, 8 votes for Richard Nixon.
South Carolina, 22 votes.
Madam Secretary, the great sovereign state of South Carolina proudly cast 22 votes for our president, President Nixon.
I think it was South Carolina that put Nixon across in the last convention 4 years ago, wasn't it?
14
Well,
votes.
South Dakota, the state stands behind the president at full 100%. Casted
no, in
14
1968 it was
votes
Wisconsin.
for President Nixon.
It was South Carolina that put Goldwater over them in
South
1964.
Dakota, 14 votes for Richard Nixon.
Tennessee, 26 votes.
Madam Secretary, the people of Tennessee, devoted to America, are proud once again to cast their 26 votes for President Richard M. Nixon.
Tennessee, 26 votes for Richard Nixon.
Texas, 52 votes.
Mr. Chairman, the sovereign state of Texas is proud to cast 52 votes for President Nixon.
Senator John Tower of Texas.
Texas, 52 votes for Richard Nixon.
There's been no move so far to make this a nomination by acclamation, as happened
Madam
to
Secretary, the
Richard Nixon
magnificent
before.
state of Utah, the center of scenic America,
He was running for vice president, but never really ran for president.
proudly cast 14 votes for President Nixon.
I think you seek acclamation when you're nervous about it.
For Richard Nixon.
He's not nervous about it.
Vermont,
The
12
question, I don't know how many conventions you've been at.
Madam Secretary,
In terms of working at a convention, I have never been at one that took a second ballot, have you?
I never have.
Never have. They don't. This one was, maybe the last one was Dewey in 1948,
Virginia, 30 votes.
or in Eisenhower it was, but then they changed, so they made it on the first ballot. I think it was Dewey in 1948 was the last time it took 2 ballots.
Milhouse Nixon.
Virginia, 30 votes for Richard Nixon.
Virgin Islands, 3 votes.
The Virgin Islands are jewels in the Caribbean, the land of unsurpassed climate-friendly people, and the showcase of democracy, proudly cast its 3 votes for the next president, Richard Milhouse Nixon.
The Virgin Islands also is, of course, a favorite vacation area for both Richard Nixon and George McGovern. They can't lose.
And was for Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey.
And Hubert Humphrey.
The Evergreen State is proud to cast its 24 votes for President Richard M. Nixon.
Washington, 24 votes for Richard Nixon.
West Virginia, 18 votes.
Madam Secretary, West Virginia, the Mountain State, proudly cast all of its votes for President Richard M. Nixon.
West Virginia, 18 votes for Richard Nixon.
Wisconsin, 28 votes.
Mr. Chairman, Wisconsin, the state that put Richard Nixon over the top in the 1968 National Convention, proudly casts all 28 votes for President Richard Nixon and will deliver to him in November.
Wisconsin, 28 votes for Richard Nixon.
Wyoming, 12 votes.
Madam Chairman, Wyoming, the equality state, the first state to give its vote to its women, proudly casts its 12 votes for our great president, Richard M. Nixon.
Wyoming, 12 votes for Richard Nixon.
A question in our mind about whether a party had ever declined to renominate an incumbent president
We have given our convention
who really wanted to be there, and apparently not. Rutherford B. Hayes was
That's
a
it.
Republican who was not renominated, but he didn't want to be. The only other case has been people like Calvin Coolidge who didn't want to be.
Will the delegates please come to order? The vote of all the delegates has been recorded. The vote for Richard Nixon is 1,347. The vote for Paul McCloskey is 1. And therefore, I declare the nominee of the Republican Party for President of the United States, President Richard Nixon.
What happened to your Harold Stassen Boone, Howard K. Smith?
I was misinformed.
Well, it's like you're feeling about Wilbur Mills, the Democratic Convention.
Sam Yorty.
Sam Yorty. Sam Yorty.
Sam Yorty. Here comes the demonstration. Now those balloons are going up. As the Saints come marching in.
This was the kind of thing that was banned and not allowed at all at the Democratic Convention.
It's kind of nostalgic now to see one of these demonstrations again. There are the balloons up at the top. The bottom of their cage may fall out at any moment. It has done so.
The Republicans also, as opposed to the Democrats, permitted more leeway in the way states announced their votes. An American tradition, which I think frequently is kind of irritating. You notice they always, much more than they would at any other time, when they announce the votes, they use not only the state slogan, but the middle name or the middle initial of the president, Richard Milhouse Nixon.
And like license plates, they generally add something favorable about their state.
Yes. But not a one of them tonight boycotted lettuce, which 4 or 5 states did in the Democratic Convention.
Red, white, and blue balloons. Miami Beach becomes the city which has been the location of 2 nominations for president for Richard Nixon. He was first nominated for vice president in Chicago, nominated for vice president again in San Francisco, first nominated for president in 1960 in Chicago, and then in 68 Miami Beach, 72 Miami Beach.
When you look over the list of cities where conventions have been held, Chicago is overwhelmingly dominant, which we've noticed even in our careers. And you wonder why Chicago has been such a great convention city up to its troubles in 68. I guess it's because you can lose a convention in Chicago.
Well, also, Chicago organizes conventions. I've never seen a city organize a convention as well.
You never have any in New York. Here I am.
They can't get the bottom out of that cage of balloons. I'm sure that's not in your prepared script for the party proceedings tonight.
See what it says about balloons. What we're doing now is waiting for Chairman Ford to name the committee to notify Mr. Nixon. And then we're going to have the benediction, and there's nothing in it about a cage of balloons that won't open. But Congressman Ford is a man of great initiative, and I'm sure he can handle it.
Some people are worried about that. A few rows behind Mrs. Nixon, there is a voice of dissent that nobody is heeding. There it is. There they come.
Actually, that may have been just time to wait for a while for the others fell.
Just behind Mrs. Nixon, there's a voice of dissent that no one is listening to. Some children are holding up a beach towel with a peace sign and 2 McCloskey stickers on it, and nobody will notice it. Brief glimpses of the Nixon family's profiles. Tricia Nixon Cox.
I don't know what happened to the report that President Nixon was going to be over at Marine Stadium at 10:30. The White House source for that is either inaccurate or nobody remembered to call us.
Julie Nixon Eisenhower.
I suppose that those 2 ladies, young ladies, have been figures of this kind in more Republican conventions than anyone else in our lifetime, beginning in 1952 when they were little teeny girls, 56, 60, 68, 72. They've been to as many conventions as Robert Kraut.
In a few minutes, we understand that President Nixon will appear at the Marine Stadium, so we will look into that when our coverage of Convention 72 continue in just a moment.
There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to vote. But there's plenty in here to convince you that you should. Time, the weekly news magazine.
Hey, Mom, can I get something cold to drink? All right, but stay out of that refrigerator. Wow, look at that. Wow, that door's got ice coming out of it. It's even crunching up the ice. I never saw anything like that before. Wow. You're not in that refrigerator, are you?
Only General Electric delivers ice and cold water to your door. General Electric, America's #1 major appliance value.
Our coverage of Convention 72 will continue following station identification.
Watch The Paul Lynde Show, premiering in 3 weeks on ABC.
Applauded for its concept, acclaimed for its production, admired for its success. This September, Movie of the Week expands its success story to 2 evenings, the Tuesday and Wednesday Movie of the Week. More great stars in outstanding roles. Herschel Bernardi, Richard Boone, Lloyd Bridges, Richard Burton, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Ben Gazzara, Susan Hayward, Hal Holbrook, David Jansen, George Kennedy, Cloris Leachman, E.G. Marshall, Darren McGavin, Rosalind Russell, Elizabeth Taylor, Clint Walker, Dennis Weaver, and many more, with 2 world television premieres every week. This September, the Tuesday and Wednesday Movie of the Week.
Channel 8, The Entertainers.
Well, President Nixon has been renominated. He will appear, I gather briefly, at the youth rally at Marine Stadium in a short while, but right now the demonstration continues down on the convention floor. Let's watch it a while. You don't see hardly many of these anymore.
I think it's interesting that President Nixon is, if our information is correct, going to appear tonight. The whole idea of a president or a presidential candidate who's been nominated being seen at a convention is fairly recent. And I think the first, was quite a shock in America when Franklin Roosevelt came to make his acceptance speech in person, which is the first time that had ever been done. The old formality, which we're going to see as soon as the demonstration is over, when Congressman Ford will name a committee to notify the candidate, used to be sort of real. They had to get on a train and go out and find William McKinley or whoever was the nominee and tell him that he was running, and he would issue a statement from his front porch. But beginning with Roosevelt, it became a tradition to come to the convention, but usually not until after nomination. The man who broke that tradition, and by breaking it has permitted President Nixon to be obvious tonight, was Lyndon Johnson, who, as I remember it in 1964 in Atlantic City, was everywhere all the time, all the days of the convention.
It's the way he ran the government. Well, presidential permissiveness has proceeded through the ages. In the time of Abraham Lincoln, it was even wrong for a president to campaign, and he didn't campaign.
Will the delegates please come to order? Will the delegates please come to order? We have a special treat for you. We have a special treat for you. Will the delegates please come to order? Go to your seats and please sit down.
Now in the hall, Congressman Ford, the permanent chairman of the convention, is back to the script that we have. And he's saying, would the delegates please sit down and come to order? He wants to announce the vote of the delegates, and he wants to appoint a committee to notify Richard M. Nixon of his renomination for President of the United States. And he will name the committee.
Do you think we ought to tell him that we've already notified him?
Well, we may not, because if he is on his way by sea to the Marine Stadium, there may not have been a radio on there, but nobody may have told him.
Well, when they notify him, do you think it'll be a surprise?
If it is, I suspect he will overcome the surprise. He said this afternoon he thought he would be renominated. He didn't. Now here is the Marine Stadium, where we momentarily expect President Nixon to appear before the rally of the young people who are here for him. And I think there we can probably hear now from Tom Jarrell.
The show rocks on here at the Marine Stadium on Key Biscayne. The band, led by Sammy Davis Jr., is sort of having a marathon, beating out a tune called Nixon Now, and some 6,500 young people who have assembled here have been clapping on and on and on because they expect the president to arrive at almost any time. But as of now, his boat is nowhere in sight. The plan is for him to pull up by boat alongside the stage, which is built out over the water here. And the crowd has clapped and danced itself into a frenzy and perhaps maybe about to get tired. But Sammy Davis keeps pouring it on. The young people keep applauding. They keep moving to new verses of the song. The latest verse saying, "We want 4 more years." And on stage we can see a manager who seems to be waiting for the president and waiting to get signals when Mr. Nixon will arrive here. He keeps looking at Sammy Davis Jr. with a very forlorn look, shaking his hand saying, no, he's not here yet. So we continue to stand by. The young people here have not run out of enthusiasm. And certainly once again we are seeing that young people of this country may differ on politics. They may be Democrats or Republicans, but when you put a fast, hard beat to music, that is the universal song of politics for the young people of this country.
Tom, can you hear?
This is Tom Jarrell, ABC News, at the Marine Stadium on Key Biscayne.
Tom, can you hear us from here? Too noisy for him to hear us. It sounds too noisy to hear us. The theory is that the president will come up on the seaward side of that stage, which is sort of a barge, and walk into the barge and then walk on in. I don't know the geography of that particular part of the bay, but you would think that the timing, which is so precise in other areas, would be precise there.
Well, Johnny Cash was supposed to be a feature in the tonight's festivities, but he decided the situation was political and decided not to take place. I just can't imagine who told him it was political. Gerald Ford has just told the delegates they can see the president at the Marine Stadium on those big screens in Convention Hall behind the podium. I don't know whether you've seen those screens, but when...
You can't see him on those big screens unless he is at Marine Stadium, is the problem.
When John Rhodes was reading out the platform earlier today, they had symbols on the back of the screen symbolizing things he was talking about, and I found it impossible to relate them to what he was talking about. We're told the president's coming now, and all the faces, as you can see, are turning in the direction from which he will come, where he will appear.
Well, Sammy Davis and the enthusiasm of the young people have finally won out here. The president, we believe, has arrived here at Marine Stadium, and instead of coming by boat, judging by the looks of the crowd and the movements of the Secret Service men here, the president is coming by automobile. His home is only maybe a quarter of a mile, a half a mile from here across the island. And the prospect that Mr. Nixon will be arriving has certainly rejuvenated the crowd that was beginning to get a bit wound down. It's a hot, muggy night, and for about 3 hours now, the young people have been dancing, clapping, and beating out tunes to a very fast, hard rock band and the music of Sammy Davis Jr. They began this number about 6 or 7 minutes ago, and have been playing it with the idea that they would continue playing it until the president arrived here. He is now in the stadium, and he is moving through the crowd. So many of the placards being held up, waved, applause underway here. Dick Shoemaker of ABC News has been here through the entire performance tonight.
It is a performance. You were saying a little earlier, this seems like a sub-convention. The wild, ecstatic...
Here comes the president moving down this way now, shaking hands as he comes, moving down toward our position. And we will throw one quick question and see. Mr. President, it's official now. You've got the nomination again. Can you say anything at all for us in the way of reaction about having the nomination at this stage in the...
Well, I think it's particularly significant that the first appearance is before the young voters, because this is the first time they vote, and the first appearance after the nomination is made before them. I'm rather pleased that there was as much interest as there was, but since it wasn't very close.
Well, certainly there are about 20 million new voters, young people who haven't voted before.
Right.
How are they going to vote? The polls seem to indicate that more are leaning toward you than maybe a lot of us first thought.
Well, I think they're going to vote their own minds, and we think we have a good shot.
Thank you very much. The president rushing on by, moving now to the stage where Sammy Davis Jr. shakes his hand.
There he is.
More than ever with Nixon now. Nixon now, more than ever. Nixon now, more than ever. More than ever need our president Nixon now.
It's all yours.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the president and the future president of the United States of America.
The young lady next to Mr. Nixon is Pamela Powell, the daughter of Dick Powell, June Allison, who was a temporary chairman of the convention last night. I suppose Sammy Davis Jr. made it from the Democrats to the Republicans with what they used to call the Rat Pack. Frank Sinatra went that way.
He did, like Sinatra. They were old associates of the Kennedys, and Sammy Davis Jr. said yesterday he's still a close Kennedy family friend. He just thinks Nixon was a better president than the Democratic candidate.
But one member of the pack, Shirley MacLaine, didn't. She went more strongly Democratic than ever.
How can they do that after so much time? They've been here 4 hours.
But we've heard from Peter Lawford or Dean Martin, the other members of that particular group.
Dean Martin supported Ronald Reagan for governor. If he did that, he can support Richard Nixon for president.
You're trying to shoot me in the back?
No. I'm just covering this for Jet Magazine.
Okay. But Pam Powell, Sammy Davis, all of those who have entertained here so splendidly at this program, I understand earlier, and to all of you who are attending this young voters rally at a time as I was driving over here from my home in Key Biscayne, as you know, it is the custom that anyone who is nominated for the presidency does not appear at the convention until after the nomination, and consequently I have not been there except to see it on television. But as I was driving over, the thought occurred to me that this was one of those moments in history that has never happened before and that will never happen again. I do not mean by that I have not been nominated before. As a matter of fact, I was nominated in 1952 and 56 for vice president. And I have twice had the honor of being nominated for president, and tonight makes it the third time. But here now, and now to put this all in the historical context, all of you know that this is the first time in the 195-year proud history of America that young voters 18 to 21 are going to participate in the election decision. And I believe that it is particularly appropriate that the first appearance of the President of the United States after his nomination be made before first voters who voting as you are. As I was coming in, I was stopped by one of the fine television commentator for ABC Network, and he asked me, as we were trying to talk over the rather, shall we say, quiet audience at the moment, he asked me what was going to happen to the youth vote. He said he was beginning to wonder whether I had concluded that perhaps the estimates that the youth vote was just automatically going to go to our opponents might be a little high. I can say this. And I want to give you an answer that I want you to think about a bit. I don't think the youth vote is in anybody's pocket. I don't think it ever will be. I think young people are not likely to vote party label. I think they're going to vote what they believe in. They're going to be independent.
I think the young people of America are going to listen to both candidates. They're casting their first vote. They want it to be a good vote. We've got just as good a shot at it as the other side, and we're going to get it with your help. Now, I want to express appreciation to all of the celebrities. That's the word we use for them, for Sammy Davis Jr. and the marvelous groups that you've been hearing here, for Pam Powell. And I want to ask all of you to realize what it means for them to be here. Now, my business is the business of politics. It's a very honored business. I hope lots of you get into it, maybe full time. But I want you to know that when you're in politics, you assume, you have to under our system, that what you're trying to do is to get somewhat over half the vote. And the other man or woman, as the case might be, is going to get somewhat less than half. Now, in show business, which is Sammy Davis Jr.'s business, and the business of others who are here, they are not trying to get half. They're trying to please everybody. And so you see, when somebody in show business comes and participates in a political rally, he or she is doing something that is a very great personal sacrifice and even a personal risk. I heard on Monday night one of the television commentators question Sammy Davis Jr. when he was sitting there with Mrs. Nixon in the presidential box. He pointed out what I had known, and which Sammy Davis, of course, quickly agreed with, that he had been a very enthusiastic supporter of President Kennedy when we ran against each other in 1960. He said he was still a very good friend of the Kennedy family. And then the commentator said, "What is your reaction, Sammy, to the fact that many people who have been your friends and your supporters, perhaps many who think you're great in show business, think maybe that you've turned against them, and that you've done so, as he put it, you've sort of sold out because you were invited to the White House to see the president?" Well, just let me give you the answer. You aren't going to buy Sammy Davis Jr. by inviting him to the White House. You're going to buy him by doing something for America. And that is what we are doing. When Sammy and I and his wife were chatting there that day, I want you to know it was one of the most moving experiences for me, and I hope it was for him. We talked about our backgrounds. We both came from rather poor families. We both have done rather well. And I know Sammy is a member of the other party. I didn't know when I talked to him what he would be doing in this election campaign, but I do know this. I want to make this pledge to Sammy. I want to make it to everybody here, whether you happen to be black or white or young or old, and all of those who are listening. I believe in the American dream. Sammy Davis believes in it. We believe in it because we've seen it come true in our own lives. But I can assure you, my friends, that the American dream can't be fully realized until every person in this country has an equal chance to see it come true in his life. Today, I pledge to you, we have worked toward that goal over the past 4 years. We're going to work toward it over the next 4 years. And I want you to know that we're grateful for the celebrities who have stuck their necks out, taken the chance, as they have, that they might lose some support, because they realize it's important to get into a campaign that affects their future and the future of their country and the future of their children. And now I'd like to just close on one note about you. This is your first election campaign. It will not be your last. I know that many of you will go into public service. I hope all of you will continue to participate in politics. As you go along, some of you will go into business, some of you may go into show business, some of you may go into some other kind of activity where somebody's going to come up to you one election year and say, stay out of the campaign because you might risk some money, you might risk some customers or clients or whatever the case might be. And I just want to urge you, don't ever do that, because what you do for America is more important than anything you do for yourself. That is what really counts. And I want all of you, the young voters of America listening here, and those who might be listening on television now, simply to know this. I've been trying to work for your future. We've had some disappointments, but we've had some successes, and I'm going to talk about both tomorrow as I make the acceptance speech. But should the opportunity come to serve 4 more years, I'm not going to be resting on what we've done in the past. I'm going to be thinking of these wonderful young faces I see out here, your enthusiasm, your idealism, your hard work. This is your first vote. And years from now, I just hope you can all look back and say it was one of your best votes. Thank you.
President Nixon has just addressed the group of young Republicans who are at the Miami Marina Stadium. We should note at this time that the Dick Cavett Show, which many of you normally see about now, won't be seen tonight because of the Dick Nixon Show with Sammy Davis Jr. He's now leaving Marina Stadium, and we'll bring in Tom Jarrell.
The president working his way back through the crowd now, shaking hands as he leaves from Marine Stadium after having a few brief remarks to those who have been assembled here. The president reaching over, shaking hands. Some in the crowd pressing hard to get through. Marks as he passes by. Says hello as he shakes hands, moving with his aides, going back to his automobile for the drive back to his home a few blocks away. And we have heard as he arrived and as he leaves what we undoubtedly will be hearing much more of during the campaign. A bad, hard rock beat of Nixon Now all together.
Tom, we tried before to see if you could hear us. Can you hear us now? He's standing too near the band, I guess. Howard, you have to assume it's planned. I mean, obviously it's planned. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's beautifully planned. And the night that he's nominated, you heard all this talk about a controlled Republican convention, except for a brief 30 seconds with Alf Landon last night. The whole emphasis has been on beautiful youth and Richard Nixon's relation to them, and his wife and his young family. Nicely done, I would say.
Yes, extremely well produced. In fact, we might ask who did it and acquired him.
I think there's 1 week open in the ABC monthly late night show, but we'll see.
He's casting an extremely wide net for everybody, youth mainly, but we'll point out later the others he's appealed to.
There'll be more guests on the Dick Nixon Show when we return to our coverage of Convention 72 right after this message.
Now a message from the Ford Motor Company.
Most inexpensive imported cars look like variations on a basic theme. Not very exciting, right? So they try to jazz them up. Funny. You know what they'll end up with? The basic theme with all the trimmings. Now, here's something different. It's a Capri. Capri's sexy on the outside, right down to its disc brakes and radial tires. Inside, the same story, with things like rack and pinion steering, 4-speed shift, all standard. Maybe that's why Capri sold more cars in its first year than any import in history. Hey, maybe that's why Capri sold more cars in its second year than any import in history. Capri, the first sexy European for under a $2,600 sticker price. Destination charges, dealer prep, title, and taxes extra. Imported for Lincoln Mercury.
The fourth session of the Republican National Convention is effectively over. Richard Nixon has been renominated, receiving, according to Congressman Ford, 1,347 votes out of a possible 1,348 as the Republican nominee to run against George McGovern in this year's election. And the evening was capped and dramatized by an appearance of the president at a rally for Youth for Nixon at the Miami Marina Stadium, where he talked briefly for about 5 minutes to a group that had been listening to rock music and to Sammy Davis Jr. throughout the evening. An evening with practically no dissent and a great deal of enthusiasm and well-managed and running only about 30 minutes late, which for a political convention is on time. Howard?
Well, Harry, it seems my fate to have to close these affirmative evenings with some thoughts about them that tend to be occasionally negative, but you've got to put these evenings in the perspective of time. Last night we remarked that our two national parties are even in this century in the time each has controlled the White House. 36 years for the Democrats, 36 years for the Republicans. Which party wins the race for the rest of the century depends on which one can put together the plans and the methods that persuade the people it can do it best. I suggest that that's going to require some substantial changes in American life, some different programs, some venturesome attitudes. Well, this convention's not over yet, but so far the non-changers, the conservatives, have really dominated it. Last night's two principal speakers were Governor Reagan and Senator Goldwater, men of the very far right. The only battle here over rules for choosing delegates in the future has been won by the conservatives, who would give a delegate from the non-populous state of Alaska some 12 times the vote of a delegate from New York, a state with big cities where the problems are and where the votes are. Mr. Nixon's speech tomorrow may indicate some needed new directions, but unless it does, the message here is going to seem to be no important change. Satisfaction, pretty much, with the way things are. A mood to re-elect Nixon, but not one to persuade the electorate that the Republicans have the plans to become the party for the rest of the century. With that thought, I give it to you, Harry.
Thank you, Howard. We'll be back tomorrow. And now for Howard and myself and for ABC News, good night.
Convention 72 has been brought to you by Goodyear, makers of tough, long-wearing polysteel tires. Polyester for smoothness, steel for protection. Polysteel, only from Goodyear. And by the Ford Motor Company. They listen better and they'd like to hear from you.
The Streets of San Francisco, starring Carl Malden as Lieutenant Mike Stone.
Oh, now, he's got no record. Come on, Larry, do me a favor. Wake somebody up.
Car 302 in emergency.